I'm Miss Rebecca. This is Erin, and I'm going to do the demo for you today that I do with my Culinary 1 class. We're going to do cinnamon banana bread. This is usually the 4th or 5th recipe that we do in Culinary 1 because this is our first quick bread recipe that we do. Another reason why we do this is because there are different elements when it comes to measurements, and then we start to talk about the different forms of gluten when it comes to flours, the difference between self-rising and all-purpose flour. We talk about how eggs are important, what the importance is of sugar, the importance of fat, liquids if they're involved. We get into leavening agents with baking soda, baking powder, and we also get into fresh ingredients, in this case the bananas. So there's a lot of touching points that I can walk around to the different groups and talk to about and get them used to doing quick breads, because after this recipe there's about 6 or 7 more that we do from here. So this is their jumping off point. We will do this in a loaf pan today. Now sometimes, since this is the first quick bread recipe that Culinary 1 does, and some of these kids have never even cracked an egg, sometimes we run out of time to actually bake it in a loaf pan, and so we will do it in muffin pans just to save time. That way they'll get done a little bit quicker and the kids will have something to take home for the end of the day. Okay, so usually what happens is, once I call roll, the Culinary 1 is usually such a large class that we're divided into Group A and Group B. So whoever is ready for the day, I will tell them to go back to the back. They'll get their aprons on, they'll get their hairnets, and then they'll go to the hand washing sink and they will wash their hands. And then after that, I usually take one kid and I show them, at this point they know, but I show them how to set up the 3-compartment sink for dishwashing, wash, rinse, and sanitize. And then from there, that person teaches another person how to do it, teaches another one, and so on. So usually after, week 2 in the kitchen, everyone knows how to set up the sink. If I ask them to go and do that, that should be no problem. Also, after they wash their hands, they're in groups of 2, and usually there's about 12 kids, so 6 groups in the kitchen. So once their hands are washed, they go to their station, and then they start reading through the recipe. Now the reason I have them do this is because they need to read through the recipe so they know what equipment that they need to get so they can start getting their mise en place together. So for example, they will read through this recipe and know that that calls for sugar, so they'll know that they need a set of dry measuring cups. They also know that they're going to need vanilla, so they'll need a set of teaspoon-tablespoon combo. They're also going to need a stainless steel mixing bowl. They're also going to need a whisk because we do everything by hand in class. They'll also need a rubber spatula. And after they get all that together, I tell them to start actually reading through the recipe. Start with the method of prep and see what the first thing is that they need to do. So the first thing that the recipe says is preheat the oven to 350. Now since we use convection, I'll have one kid go over to the stove, flip the toggle switch up, and then set to 325. This is another teaching point that we do in class. Convection cooks a lot faster than conventional at home, so we always dial it back 25 degrees. Also, when they get ready to bake off, we will discuss how the product will actually bake quicker. In the conventional oven, it says 55 to 65 minutes in the loaf pan. And so in class, since we are using convection, it'll probably take about 35 to 40 in the loaf pan. If we do the muffins, probably anywhere from 20 to 25. So those are things that we will watch. Those are things that they can check on, because halfway through the baking process, we always like to spin just to make sure everything is nice and even when it gets baked. Okay, so at this point, they will go ahead and start to get their ingredients together. Now, I have them read through the recipe, so the first thing that they'll need to do after turning on the oven is spray their loaf pan. Now I have a stainless steel cart that I put, we call it the community cart, that I put their ingredients on. So they will know to go over to the cart, find their pan spray, and go ahead and get their pan sprayed. Now we work on stainless steel workbenches, so I've always taught them to tilt the pan up so there's no blowback, and to spray over the counter. That way they don't spray into the floor, causing a slipping and fall hazard. So I'm going to do mine over the sink, since it's convenient for me. All the way around the edges and bottom completely coated so we don't have any stick. Alright, so that's the first step they'll do, and then they'll stick back to the side. Now, their next step is they are going to combine their sugar, their butter, their cinnamon, and their eggs together. This is when they're going to cream these ingredients together. This is where I can start explaining to them what creaming is. Because sometimes if you say cream, they're thinking dairy product. But this is one of the first steps to basic baking, is to cream together your sugar and your your sugar and your butter, or your fat in this case. So we're going to go ahead and get that together. Now in class we have the big rolling bins full of AP flour and sugar. So they know to take their measuring cup, and then there is a offset spatula or a straight edge spatula laying on top. So they know to take their stainless steel bowl, to take their dry measuring cups, and to go to the bins. That's how they get their sugar and that's how they get their flour. So they dip in, use the straight edge or the offset to level off, then it goes into their bowl, and then they go back to their station. Since there's so many kids in class, this seems to keep things moving at a pretty good pace. Now one thing I like about this recipe is we can start talking about fractions. For some reason, some of my kids seem to have a hang-up when it comes to 3/4 of a cup. Because most of the time in your standard set of measuring cups, you do not have a 3/4 of a cup. You have your full, your half, your third, and your quarter. For some reason, this seems to befuddle them at times. I'll ask them, how do you get 3/4 of a cup? And someone will say, fill it up all the way on the cup and then shake some off. So no, we can't do that, because baking is science, it's chemistry, and everything must be exact. So this is a teaching tool that I use constantly whenever there's 3/4 of a cup in a recipe. I always like to call out, how do we get 3/4 of a cup? And so some of them will get it right away, some of them still have the hang up, but that verbal reinforcement seems to really help them. So we will go ahead and measure our half and our 1/4 cup of sugar. And we'll get that leveled off and get that into our bowl. From that, we're going to add our butter, then our cinnamon, and our eggs. Alright, so the recipe calls for a 1/2 cup of butter, which is a stick, and that's another teaching tool that we like to go through in class and talk about the different tablespoon measurements and the different measurements that actually come on the butter packages. Now we'll also say, because our program lacks money and funding at times, we do use margarine quite often. And then I do get it into the big, large 1-pound blocks. So that's another way that they can go ahead and keep learning their measurements. And they'll use their dry measuring cups to measure out a full cup of something like that. Alright, so we need to add in our 2 eggs. And going back to what I said earlier, some of them I've never cracked an egg in class, so that seems to always be exciting for some and terrorizing for others. Especially when we get into recipes where we start separating eggs. Alright, 2 eggs, and then our cinnamon, which is 1 teaspoon. Now we do use these large spice containers, and this is another thing that we teach in class, is we always pop the little shaker off, because there's no way to shake that accurately into here. So we go straight in, and then sometimes we'll have them just tap to get an accurate level measurement. And then they always put that back on, and then anything they take off the community cart goes back, since we have so many groups sharing ingredients. Okay, so now that we've got those ingredients in, we're going to take our whisk and we're going to start creaming that together. I always like to tell them to pop the yolk. That seems to make the eggs incorporate a little bit easier. Now we actually do own electrical equipment, but I think it's good for them to know how to do these things by hand. Your hands are your best tool that you have in the kitchen. At this point, I like to show them, if you spin the bowl like this, you're just good about incorporating your ingredients in. And usually what they'll do is somebody will whisk for a little while, and then they'll start complaining that their arm's tired. And then the other person will take over. Then also I like to tell them how important is the other partner while they are blending to make sure that they get their sides scraped down really, really well to get all of our ingredients incorporated in. Right. Then of course we do this step by step. And then I always tell them to finish one step, let me go around and check, and then they can proceed on to the next step. So after they are finished with step one, getting these ingredients creamed together, I always go around and make sure there's no lumps of butter or margarine in our case in the bowl, and everything's nice and creamy. Okay. So now, step two, we are going to add our bananas, and then we're going to add our vanilla. So our recipe calls for 2 ripe, a cup of banana. Now, when I pull out the ripe bananas that have the nice little freckles on them, I always get the ew and the gross because it's another teachable moment. I tell them the nice, pretty yellow bananas that you eat for breakfast for your lunch, those aren't great for baking. I said, you want the older kind, the kind they put in the bargain discount bin at the store. I said, when you can smell that banana, you know that banana is perfect for baking. So these were some that were overly ripened that we took out of the peel, strung, and put them in the freezer. And we do that sometimes in class as well. It's just a good way to recycle and to show them that you can reuse an ingredient that's starting to get a little bit older. There's no need in throwing that away. Because in the kitchen, money, 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 it all costs money. Every little bit counts. So we'll go ahead and get our cup of bananas measured out right here. Now these are already fairly squishy. And when they actually peel them and destring them, I have them put them on the cutting board. And then they take the back of a stainless steel spoon and they smash it down to give it, we call that baby food look. We want it nice and smushy. Alright, so to the bananas, we are going to add our vanilla, which is a half a teaspoon. And then after we do that, we'll give this another quick little stir. I always tell them to do the vanilla, which is, or any extract for that matter, just right over the bowl. That way, if it does, you know, a teeny little smudge, it does, you know, get in there over that, it's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. We'd rather have it go in the bowl than in the floor or on the table. Alright. So we're going to get that just good and incorporated in. Okay. Our next step in, we're going to add in our dry ingredients. Now we're going to add in all-purpose flour. Now, when it comes to flours, we use all-purpose instead of self-rising. That way we control the leavening agent and the amount that goes into a product. If you do use self-rising and you have a recipe like this one, for example, that calls for baking soda, you can get too much of a leavening agent and then have it not rise like it's supposed to. So all-purpose is what we use in the kitchen. That way we get to control that. So it calls for a cup and a half. Flour. And then again, they would be going to the bins at this point using the straight edge spatula and leveling it off. So into that we are going to add our baking soda, in which this recipe calls for a half a teaspoon. And then we'll also be adding in a half a teaspoon of salt. So we'll reiterate again that baking powder, baking soda, and then again level straight from the box into the bowl are going to be used as a leavening agent for rising. And then when we start talking about salt, because a lot of times they have questions about why do we use salt in cookies, why do we use salt in quick breads? And so that's a good teaching point to tell them about how salt enhances the flavor of what we're trying to make. Enhances the flavor of the food. Okay, so at this point, we will start to mix again. Now, this is a point when I have to come around and tell them, don't go to town on it really, really super fast. You're going to throw half your flour on your partner and in the floor. So, we'll have them start slow. And then again,